Welcome to DynamicsCon. Let's get ready to learn from our Microsoft Dynamics 365, Dynamics GP, and Power Platform superheroes. Stay tuned for our Microsoft Success Day tomorrow with content designed around implementation, optimization and expansion, user adoption, and migration. Our multi-day event is free thanks to our heroic sponsors. Be sure to visit our roundtable sessions held throughout the conference by clicking on the Roundtables tab found on the left menu bar. Check out the event info section on the Home tab for more details on our rapidly growing Dynamics user group community. Here we go, superheroes. Please welcome Herb Johnson. Today he will present his session, FinOps Approvals within Outlook and Teams. Please stick around after Herb's session for a live Q&A.
Hello everybody, welcome to DynamicsCon Virtual, March of 2023. I want to first of all thank you, the attendees, and everyone that voted for my session to be available here on DynamicsCon Virtual. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you putting your faith in me and sharing my knowledge with you. I also want to thank DynamicsCon for giving us this opportunity so we can share our knowledge and make it available to everybody and just help each other out within Dynamics. So thank you very much for that. My name is Herb Johnson. I'm a Dynamics 365 Senior Consultant with Stone Ridge Software. I've been working in CRM or the Dataverse, Dynamics 365, whatever the current name is or whatever you want to call it, since 2010. I got my start in 1984 as a mainframe programmer in the Marine Corps. So I spent a number of years doing programming with a little bit of website development and some data warehouse work also before getting into CRM. I can be reached at herb@stoneridgesoftware.com. You can see my email address there. Also my LinkedIn profile address also. Take a moment to take a picture of the QR code to the right. That'll take you directly to my LinkedIn profile too. Also, take advantage of the chat facility within the session. I will be online with you watching the video, so I'm able to chat with you and we can talk about any of the questions or subjects that come up as we're going through this session. My session today is about FinOps approvals within Outlook and Teams. So what we're going to do is look at what it takes to give the manager or the approver the ability to approve purchase orders in FinOps without actually going into FinOps. So they'll be able to use it within Teams or within Outlook. So it should save them time and effort and they can focus on other things. They will see information about the purchase order and able to comment on their choice whether to approve or reject at that point. So my agenda is a little bit about the background of how I came about to put together this Power Automate and project with FinOps. I will go through the demo. Keep in mind the demo is using a lot of background processes, so I'm kind of bounce a little bit back and forth while these processes are running, so we don't have to sit and wait through that process. Also, I'm going to go over some things that are needed to make this happen, and then my favorite part is the deeper dive into Power Automate, as Power Automate is more of my passion area that I like to work in. So for background, a project manager came to me to discuss this proof of concept related to approving or rejecting POs outside of FinOps. This person actually found out about this by seeing the need on a project they were working on, and then they did some research and found the different learning pages within Microsoft. So they took a look at these pages. As you can see here, I've got these two listed for your reference. And then this person reached out to me to ask me if I would do a proof of concept, which I really excitedly agreed to do because I like to create new things with Power Automate and really try to see what we can accomplish with this awesome tool. And what I'm going to show you here quickly is the pages here within the first page here that we looked at in Microsoft Learn, Business Events, and Microsoft Power Automate. And it goes through creating Power Automate flows as it relates to FinOps and business events. And there's a lot of different business events that we can trigger Power Automates for. The second page, it gets into a deeper dive into the actual scenario we're talking about today. And you can see down here they have included a diagram of what it looks like and what the steps are to create this. Now, I didn't follow this exactly because there are some nuances here and there, but I use this as my guide to build out what we're going to look at today. The demo, we're going to do a request purchase order approval in FinOps first. We'll be in there, we'll look at that purchase order. We'll submit it for approval, and that'll trigger some background processes. And then after that, we're going to look at the request in Outlook and Teams. Now, this might take a little bit of time for that to come across, so I'll try to keep things going in relation to that. And then once we do see those, I will show you what the differences are and what they look like for the approver, and we'll approve the request either in Outlook or Teams. I'm not sure which one. We'll see what happens, which way I go. And then we'll go back to the purchase order in FinOps and do a refresh and see the approval status change. So with that, I'm going to switch over to FinOps and go into the purchase order. Now I have this purchase order up here. I created it earlier for my Acme office supplies. Acme is one of my favorite companies going back to my childhood watching Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. Acme was always the company of choice for the Coyote in that respect. So soft spot in my heart there. But I've added 3 different products here so we can see those listed in our approval once we receive that. Just to look over here to the right a little bit, you'll see I put on some different quantities and some different prices and so on, so we can just see that for comparison. So within FinOps, we click on the workflow, we get the submit button to confirm that. It's going to do a little bit more processing. So keep in mind we're in a demo environment also, so we don't get all the horsepower that a production does. So hopefully we'll be able to keep moseying along here today. So now that we have this, we have a comment that we can add into here. So the user may put in something like, please approve for the DynamicsCon presentation. And then we down here and we click submit. Now you see that please wait, we are processing. So as this takes place, there is a background process within FinOps that spins up every 1 minute in our case. It may be different in other FinOps environments, and a system administrator can actually adjust that to different timings. I'm not sure what the values can be, if it's if it can get less than a minute, or how long it can be set to wait. So it waits for that to happen, and what I'll do here is we'll click and we'll look at the workflow history down here also. Now you notice in this little window there's approve or reject. So if the person is in FinOps, they can approve or reject it here also. But let's have a look at the workflow history. So as it's spinning up the workflow history, we can see that the workflow kicked off, and you can see the different steps involved in the workflow that took place. And as we get to the bottom one, this is where it's going to trigger that Power Automate, and we're going to see that approval come across. Now with that, I'm going to switch over to my Teams, and we noticed here that it has not come through yet. So those background processes are still running along with the Power Automate. So while we're waiting on that, I'm going to actually go into the flow itself and show that to you. Let's go back to here, just talk a little bit about the flow here. This is the basis or the flow or Power Automate, the majority of it within this. As you can see up here at the top, this is our trigger. A business event occurs. This is a business event within FinOps, and once that happens, it returns a package of information about the trigger itself and the purchase order, in this case, that we are wanting to approve of. So we do a parse JSON, which actually breaks down this information into fields that we could use. And then I'm going to initialize a purchase order number, so I'm grabbing that out so I know what the purchase order number is. And then I start initializing a variable so I can format the PO lines that we're going to display in that approval request. And then also a PO, or the PO total amount, so we can get that too. The last two items, the main one here, this is the meat and potatoes. The main thing is the PO approval process. This is a scope action where we encapsulate, or it contains all of the main processes involved in this approval process. And then one thing I like to do with all my Power Automates is I add error handling here. You can see this dotted red arrow, which means if there's an error or a skip or timeout or something, it's going to go in and process this error notification thing. So we can actually take a little bit of a look at that too. So let's go back and see if we've got a response yet from our Power Automate. And it does not look like it showed up. Oh, there it is. Good timing. So you can see I got notified in Teams that I have a request that was sent to me. If I click on this request, you'll see on the right here, it pulls up this approval request. And what this request is going to show us when it shows up here, there we go. Now this is the approvals is an app within Teams. You can see I have it actually tagged down here on the left for easier action. But you'll see here's how we created the approval, and it's a requested approval. It's referencing the person that it's addressing related to this purchase order. A new purchase order needs your approval. That's a message that was defined in the workflow that the FinOps administrator developed that does this trigger. Please approve this for the DynamicsCon presentation. There's that note that I put in there. So it pulls in that information also to provide that approver, to give them the ability to do this without having to go look for things. We see what the document is. It tells them what the purchase order number is, what company it's for, and some additional instructions, basically pretty simple, just please approve it. This instruction can be edited or updated, by your administrator for more details. So as you can see here, we've got our formatted detail lines that are made up of this purchase order. We've got the product, quantity, prices, total amount. We have them nicely formatted in a dollar with the cents, so they're easy to read. And we have an attachment here that we're able to do. I'll click on that attachment. You see a new tab will open, and it'll go right into that purchase order. So if that approver really wants to look at the more details that were not provided, they could actually go into that purchase order by just clicking that. So that'll take a little bit, but you get the idea. So as we continue to scroll down here, you'll see the status, who is sending it, pending response, who requested it, and so on. And then there's comments here. And what I'd also like to show you is what it looks like in Outlook. So here's an email I received for that purchase order also. And you can see it provides the same amount of information, and also approve and reject buttons, which are also showed in Teams. Now let me pull that aside so we can get back to Teams. So the next step here is We can apply a comment such as, this looks great. Buy it up. And we can click approve here. You'll see that you get the submitting your response, and we go back into we get notified that it's been approved. When we click here, we can see that. And keep in mind, I set myself as the individual approver and notification. If there's multiple people on the approvals, all the individuals will see that it is approved or have the ability to approve it. So basically we got the green light here, it's approved, and just that additional information involved. Now, another neat part of it is when we go back to the initial request, you'll see that the approval realizes that it's already been approved. So even though we clicked on the one, we see it's been approved. So if a second person was looking at this as being an approver and person one already approved it, the second person would see that it's done and they don't have to approve it again. And also with that in mind, if we go back into the email from Outlook, you'll see we're spinning here. It says it's already been completed. So it's really nice that we're not going to get double entry or confusion as people are looking at these. What is needed? So in order to make this happen, there's a few things I had to get. I had to get access to FinOps and Power Apps in that tenant's the word I'm looking for. So the account has to have access to FinOps. It has to be somewhat of an elevated level so it can get those events and be able to trigger based on that. And then of course Power Apps, so then we can get to the workflow and build that out, or the Power Automate, sorry, and build that out. Also the FinOps approval workflow. This is a workflow that will be created by your FinOps administrator or somebody, maybe a super user, somebody in the FinOps world that can do that. And that's important because that's the initial startup for that trigger to take place. And then again, Power Apps instance within the tenant. This will have a solution that will hold the Power Automate and then the Power Automate itself. So just a quick look at the FinOps workflow that we have in place for our demo today. So as we saw, we had the start button to submit the workflow for submittal. We put that comment in there. We hit OK or submit, and it went down and it checked, well, what's the value of this purchase order? If it was less than 5,000, it would go down this path. If it was not, it would go the other path. And this level right here, this is where the trigger really actually takes place and happens for us. And once it gets to that, then we see that Power Automate kick off and the whole approval process begins for the external to a FinOps. Here's the actual Power Automate. Within our Dataverse instance, we have a environment here. This is Clyde. He's the one that set this up for me, and he set up the FinOps environment for me. So I'm going to walk through each of these actions and kind of talk you through them and let you know what's involved. So the first one is a FinOps action when a business event occurs. So these business events are set up within FinOps, and we can take advantage of those to trigger based on those. And within this, we have to decide which instance of FinOps to use. We have to pick the workflow work item category. So that's that level within that workflow that I showed you previously when it triggers. And then the business event, so the purchase order workflow. In this case, it's item number 63. And it all depends on your environment which number that will be. So for others, it could even be just one, not necessarily 63. So keep that in mind that it's different or could be different within environments. And then our legal entity, of course, FinOps, you can have a number of different legal entities, but this is the one we're triggering off of. And once this triggers, as I mentioned later, it brings back a payload full of information. Now we had to get a JSON schema, so we're able to parse that out and pull in the different pieces of information and get that here. And that is done through FinOps administration area, and you can get more details over here in how to get that. That's more down a little bit lower within these instructions. So once we have that payload, we can start on more with our Power Automate. One thing I had to add in my case, I found that in my troubleshooting, it was triggering multiple times for one purchase order. So I had to make sure I was only going to process that once. So I created this scope here to encapsulate the actions to accomplish that, to decide whether to let the Power Automate session continue to run or to cancel it. So basically what I did is I created a small table within Dataverse that would hold some information. I would look for that information on that table using the filter roles based on the event ID returned from our trigger. I would compose the record count. I wanted to see a little bit of troubleshooting for myself just to see and make sure this works, how many records were returned. And then we have a condition that says, hey, if no records were returned, we can continue on with the Power Automate. And I'm going to put a record out there to say I'm continuing on. If it's a subsequent session, this is going to be one or more. So then we're just going to terminate it as canceled so we don't have too many approval emails coming into our manager's mailbox. So more or less just kind of a safety precaution just to make sure we're only getting it once. These next actions are some variables we're creating. We're going into getting this purchase order number. It comes over as a longer string, so we're using an expression within Power Automate to pull out that purchase order number. And basically it's some string actions where we're saying start at character 16 and pull in everything to the next comma. So let me just move over that a little bit so you can look at that if you'd like. My next one here is we're initializing a variable for PO lines. So what we're doing with this variable is we're starting to build out that look. So we format the lines of the purchase order together. One of the things to note here is within the action that sends out that approval request, there is some formatting for tables that is different from your standard HTML table or like Excel type table, that sort of thing that you would see in Word. And we have to use these vertical lines to delimit the columns. And if you can see a little bit within here, there's colons, and when it's a colon on either side, in between there, that means center that value. If they're on the right, it means right justify the value. And if there's none, it'll be left justified. And that's how we get that started with those. Our next variable is just our placeholder for the amount. When I was working on this, I reached out to the FinOps people and asked, is there a specific data element I could grab somewhere to pull the total amount? And I found out that it's dynamic. So later on, you'll see how I use this variable to calculate the total based on the line items. And then here's our scope, PO approval process. So here's my container for the meat and potatoes of this whole approval process. The first thing to be done here, though, is do another FinOps action. And what we're doing here is we're looking at that instance and we're asking it to validate that that work item is still valid, and we pass it our work item instance ID. What this is doing is just doing a double check to make sure that that purchase order approval is still waiting. There's a chance that maybe the user who submitted it decided later, oh wait, I got to recall that. I got to add a couple more line items or something changed. So we don't want to send out an approval if it doesn't actually exist anymore. Or maybe the approver happened to be in FinOps at the time and saw it and approved it there. So based on that, we have a condition that we look at and the value that's returned from this action. If it's true, we continue with our approval process. If it's false, we come down this line, and we could add additional actions here if we needed to notify somebody that it's no longer waiting approval or changes, so we could send out an email. We could actually post something in Teams to notify somebody, or maybe we just want to record a log entry somewhere. So as we go down the true path, the first thing I did here, and this is something I added in that's not in our instructions from the Learn site, is I went out and I got the user that did the request so I could use their full name on the request. So it's basically going on that instance. System users is the table, and then the work item owner is the unique ID that we're able to get that with. My next step is to list the purchase order header, and as you can see, the entity name we're using here, the instance is the same, but here we're doing a filter query, and this is where I'm using that variable purchase order number. So I'm getting that one specific one header based on that purchase order. My next line we're looking at here is another list items, but this time we're going after the line items within the purchase order. So that would be those 3 lines that you saw at the bottom of the purchase order. I need to get those so I can get the names of the items, the quantities, the price, etc. And you can see here again, I'm getting it for that specific purchase order. So that sends off that request to get that data. We apply to each record returned. So in our case, it's going to be 3 records. Their values is where they exist. And as we go through these, I'm going to increment my purchase order total based on the line item amount. So now we're getting that grand total, we're incrementing it as we go. A couple more actions, we're formatting the unit price, and we want it to look like it's a dollar amount. So we get that dollar sign, we get the comma, we get 2 decimal places. And we do the same for the net amount within that line item also. And you can see here, this is the line item coming back from that purchase order lines. And then at the end of this, apply to each for our 3 line items in this case. We're going to append the string variable. Let's see if I can get this open up. Here we go. So we have our line items variable that we were using, that we started up at the top, and we're putting in these variables or data items that we got back for each line item. One thing to note here is because the approval action formats a little bit differently, we have to intentionally put a carriage return in here. So basically click there, hit the enter button so you move to the next line. That makes sure that this is a new line formatted for that. And you can see we put the line description, so we get the product description, we get the purchase quantity, the unit price, and in this case it's the formatted unit price with the dollar sign in the decimal places, and also the net amount. Once we're done with the line items, we come down here, we do another format, so we can format that total amount to our currency. And then, as you notice here, I have a compose. I use compose quite often in my Power Automates for troubleshooting when I want to make sure I see what I'm getting for a particular item or value out of an action or response. You can mix text along with a dynamic value. In this case, I want to see what the workflow user email looked like to make sure it was formatted as expected. Here's the main item here. Once we've done all this work, we're going to format and start that approval. So as it says, start and wait for an approval. So what this action will do is it'll create that email, it'll create that Teams notification entry, and then it sits and waits for a response. So as we build this out, I chose approve, reject, first to respond. So if it goes out to many different people, the first person to respond, whether it's a reject or approve, they're the only one that's going to do it. The other ones, when they come into it, they're going to see, like we saw earlier, that it's already been approved or rejected. They don't need to act upon it. A couple other options we could have here if we wanted to switch them out or set dynamically. Let's see if I can get my mouse to click right. There we go. A couple other ones were everybody must approve. So that means if we have multiple approvers, all of them have to approve it. We can do some different custom responses for all or wait. There's a lot of options that are available here for us. Now, if I can get that to go back to where it was, we can see what else we're doing here. There we go. So we have a title. You can see the red asterisk is a required field. So we're putting in the title of the workflow, or not the workflow, the purchase order that we got back from the trigger. There it is. I assign this to myself. This is a hard-coded thing just for the demo. Otherwise, what we would do is we would take this workflow user emails and put it in there. If it's multiple people involved in that workflow coming from what the administrator in FinOps created, it would be multiple email addresses, and they would all go out to them. And then in the details area, this is like your body of your email. You can dynamically put in hard-coded text along with dynamic data coming from any of the actions that we performed above, such as we got that username by looking at the system user table and pulling that back. We've got the workflow comment that comes in, you know, when we said, hey, can you please approve this for the DynamicsCon session? That's what went in here. The document itself, this is the purchase order name and number and the company that is on the purchase order. So we have that information. Any additional instructions put into place by the FinOps administrator when they created that workflow. And here's our variable for our PO lines table. So that would get displayed there, and then our PO total right here. And then down here, it gives us the ability to add an item link and an item description. Now, you remember I clicked on a link and it opened up into the purchase order that right here, that's related to that approval. So that's where that gets built out. So at this point, it sends out the request for approval. You get the person will get the email. They'll get that Teams notification. They don't have to go into FinOps and try to find it and dig it up to make it happen. So once they approve it or reject it within their Teams or Outlook, this fires back up at the next step right here. And what we do is we look through the responses that come in. And in this case, we don't have to do anything special. We just execute this action for FinOps back to that instance. We tell it that we've completed that workflow item. And we have to make sure we get the instance ID in there to make sure we got the right item that we're telling it to do. And what the outcome is, and that's the response directly from the above approval action that we sent out. and then we can put in different comments about that and pass that along. And then the target user from the work order, and then also run as that person. So that takes place. Now, just as a bonus here within the workflow, I just want to give you a quick look at some error handling here. You'll see we have our red arrow coming down. So if anything in that scope above fails or is skipped or times out, it'll trigger this to handle. If it runs successfully, this previous scope, this action never happens. The scope just sits there and doesn't take place. But we have the ability to grab information about the error, when it happened. We can format a table to tell us like the error status, where it happened, what the actual error is, and then we can send out an email to the appropriate person or team that needs to know that this error took place so they can address the issue. And then, of course, we terminate the session because we know that an error took place. So with that, let's go back to the slide deck and move into take advantage of the chat. Now remember, I'll be here during the playing of this session. I can chat with you live during that and afterwards. So feel free to make sure that you take advantage of that, put down your comments, ask your questions, and let's get some good conversation going. So with that in mind, I just wanted to thank you again for attending my session, for voting for my session, so I had the opportunity to share this with you. And again, to DynamicsCon for giving me the opportunity to share my knowledge with other people, the opportunity to meet people I've never met before, so we can build that community and share our experiences with each other. And just one last note, I'm Herb Johnson. Here's my contact information. If you didn't get a chance to scan that QR code, please go ahead and do so now. And I look forward to chatting with you in the future when we have this session recorded or played for everyone. Thank you very much and have a good day.